Have you ever wondered what holds an empire together? Is it trade, culture, or military might? What if I told you that one of the most powerful empires in history was built on something much darker? Something that could turn neighbor against neighbor, and friend against foe. I'm talking about an empire built on fear. For centuries, the Assyrian Empire dominated the ancient Near East. From modern-day Iraq, their influence stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. They were masters of warfare, engineering, and administration. But their most effective tool wasn't a sword or a chariot. It was psychological terror. The story of Assyria begins humbly. They were a small city-state on the Tigris River, often overshadowed by their more powerful neighbors, the Babylonians and the Hittites. For a long time, they were just another player in the complex game of ancient politics. But something changed around the 9th century BC. A new line of aggressive kings came to power, and they had a vision: total domination. This was the beginning of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, and its rise was nothing short of terrifying. Kings like Ashurnasirpal II perfected a strategy of conquest that was brutally effective. Their campaigns were not just about defeating armies, they were about breaking the will of entire populations. The Assyrian war machine was the most advanced of its time. They were pioneers of siege warfare, building massive ramps and towering siege engines to breach the walls of defiant cities. Their archers and spearmen were disciplined and relentless, but their real weapon was their reputation. Before an Assyrian army even arrived, terrifying stories would precede them. They made sure of it. Their own official records, carved in stone for all to see, weren't just historical accounts, they were propaganda. These reliefs and inscriptions detailed, in graphic detail, the fates of those who dared to resist. They depicted cities being burned to the ground, leaders being brutally executed, and populations being led away in chains. The message was crystal clear: surrender or suffer a fate worse than death, and it worked. Many cities, hearing of the approaching Assyrian horde, would simply open their gates and submit. Hoping to avoid the horrific alternative, fear was a tool of statecraft. Wielded with surgical precision, once a territory was conquered, the fear didn't stop. The Assyrians were masters of control. To prevent rebellion, they practiced a policy of mass deportation. They would uproot entire populations, craftsmen, scholars, elites, and forcibly resettle them in other parts of the empire. Imagine being torn from your home, everything you've ever known, and marched hundreds of miles to a strange land where you don't speak the language or know the customs. This policy served two purposes. First, it shattered local identities and loyalties, making organized resistance nearly impossible. Second, it allowed the Assyrians to move skilled labor to wherever it was needed. Whether to build new cities or to work the fields, it was a cruel but brilliant strategy for managing a vast and diverse empire. The entire state was a finely tuned machine, lubricated by the constant, low-level dread of its subjects. From their magnificent capital cities like Nineveh, the Assyrian kings ruled with an iron fist. They built spectacular palaces adorned with reliefs. Showing their power, they created one of the world's first great libraries, collecting knowledge from all corners of their empire. On the surface, it was a golden age of power and culture. But underneath this glittering facade, the foundations were cracking. An empire built on fear has a fundamental weakness. Fear can command obedience, but it can never inspire loyalty. For generations, the conquered peoples of the Assyrian Empire harbored a deep and burning resentment. They paid their taxes, they obeyed the governors, but they were just waiting for a moment of weakness, waiting for a chance at revenge. And that moment came. By the late 7th century BC, the empire was overstretched. Constant warfare and the enormous cost of maintaining control were taking their toll. A series of weaker kings ascended the throne, and internal power struggles began to erupt. The fear that had held the empire together began to fade. Sensing this weakness, the empire's oldest enemies and most oppressed subjects saw their opportunity. The Babylonians in the south, who had been subjugated for centuries, rose in rebellion. They were joined by the Medes, a powerful people from the mountains of modern-day Iran. Together, They formed a coalition with a single goal: to destroy the Assyrian Empire once and for all. The war that followed was brutal. The Assyrians, for so long the predators, were now the prey. The very tactics they had used against others were now turned on them. The coalition armies marched on the Assyrian heartland, fueled by generations of hatred. One by one, the great Assyrian cities fell. In 612 BC, the unthinkable happened. The grand capital of Nineveh, the so-called city of blood that had terrorized the world, was besieged. After a long and desperate fight, its walls were breached. The victorious armies poured in, and the revenge they exacted was terrible. The city was plundered, burned, and utterly destroyed. The destruction was so complete that the location of Nineveh was lost to history for over 2,000 years. Within just a few years, the mighty Assyrian Empire, which had seemed invincible, was completely wiped off the map. Its people were scattered, its culture was absorbed, and its name became a distant memory, a cautionary tale whispered through the ages. So, what can we learn from the rise and fall of this empire of fear? The story of Assyria is a powerful reminder that true, lasting power cannot be sustained by brutality alone. You can conquer lands, you can build monuments, you can force millions to bow before you, but fear is a brittle foundation. It creates enemies, not allies. It breeds resentment, not respect. In the end, the very fear that the Assyrians had so expertly cultivated became the seed of their own destruction. The hatred they inspired united their enemies and fueled a desire for revenge that, when finally unleashed, was unstoppable. It's a timeless lesson from history. Empires built on cruelty are destined to crumble, and those who live by the sword often perish by it. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this journey into the past as fascinating as I did, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories from history. See you next time.